All right, it's 12 o'clock, and happy to be here to moderate the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation webinar. Super excited for this one. I am Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, ISU Extension and Outreach, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. Um, Faculty affiliate with the Iowa Learning Farms program here at Iowa State University. Iowa Learning Farms is a partnership of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Iowa DNR, ISU Extension and Outreach, and many other partners around the state. As I've said many times, one of my favorite times of the week is to get to moderate the webinar, and this week that's definitely the case. We are fortunate to have with us Jake Wilson. Jake is an environmental scientist with Shive Hattery. He's going to talk to us today about from impact to improvement, how mitigation banking supports Iowa's aquatic resources. As always, if you have questions, excuse me, please type those into the chat box and we'll get those to Jake at the end of his talk. And with that, Jake, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Jake Wilson, and I'm coming to you today from West Des Moines, Iowa. We will get into it today. Again, as Matt mentioned, the name of or the title of my presentation today is From Impact to Improvement: How Mitigation Banking Supports Iowa's Aquatic Resources. And hopefully, everyone will learn a little bit today. So we'll just get right into it. Before we get too far into it, though, I do want to give you a little bit of a background on me. I am a farm kid. I grew up in Lenox, Iowa, which is in the southwest part of the state in Taylor County. Grew up on a working farm that raised cattle, swine, and row crop. There in the photo, you can see the farm with some ponds there in the background and all the cattle that I showed in 4-H.
Just
Those
trying to
ponds.
get on, Jake, you're just trying to get on my good side, having cattle that you showed. So that's near and dear to my heart as well. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to
No, you're
interject a little
good.
humor there. So
But no, those streams and ponds, I grew up playing in them, caught salamanders in the wetland across from my house. And after leaving Lenox, I went to Iowa State University, graduated in 2013 with a degree in landscape architecture and environmental science. And little did I know that playing in those wetlands and streams would eventually turn into an occupation that I now do. I'm a certified professional wetland scientist who operates as an environmental scientist here at Shive Hattery. We're an architecture and engineering firm, and that is, or at least I'm based in West Des Moines. We're all over the United States, but I do specialize in regulatory coordination that keeps my clients out of trouble. Today's agenda, the presentation will cover compensatory mitigation and mitigation banking. The first thing we'll be answering what is compensatory mitigation. Then we'll get into why should we be protecting Iowa's wetlands and streams. We will work to explore how banks work around Iowa's farmland. What does the mitigation process look like from a consulting perspective? And then how can a mitigation bank be established? And then ultimately, finally, some questions from you. So let's get right into it. What is compensatory mitigation? Well, it is a fundamental objective of compensatory mitigation to offset environmental losses that result from unavoidable impacts to waters of the United States, which are authorized by Department of the Army of Corps of Engineers permits. So mitigation relates to the Clean Water Act, Section 404 specifically. As a consultant, I'm typically involved in development projects, and when a developer comes to me and asks, "Hey, we're building along a stream, and there's some wet areas that we're going to be building on. Is that going to require any special coordination?" And my answer in almost all cases is yes, and that is where the mitigation process really starts. So before we get too far into what mitigation is, why are we protecting Iowa's wetlands and streams in the very first place? When it comes to wetlands, wetlands provide essential habitats for biodiversity. There are many endangered species, including the Blanding's turtle, which is pictured here, and migratory bird species, which live in the wetlands. Wetlands also purify water by removing sediments and other pollutants. They're commonly known as the kidneys of the watersheds. Wetlands control floods. In fact, 1 acre of wetland can hold up to 1.5 million gallons of floodwater. Wetlands also work to support economic activity in the state through recreation and resource provision. And then wetlands also store carbon through vegetative photosynthesis and the trapping of sediments. In fact, wetlands are carbon sinks that can hold up to 20% of the state's carbon production. And wetlands also play a vital role in water cycle by recharging groundwater. Streams are also important in the state of Iowa because stream corridors allow for the movement of species. There are many migratory bird flyways that go through Iowa because of our streams. Many streams in Iowa have been straightened through the course of history, and this has resulted in the increase of water velocity, which ultimately leads to bank erosion and decreased water quality. So, stream bank restoration in mitigation banks works to restore this natural function through remeandering streams and then working to reduce entrenchment and get those streams connected back to their floodplain. And finally, stream and wetland buffers in the state work to slow water entering the streams and then ultimately reducing the impacts of flooding. So, why mitigation banks? The 2008 mitigation banking rule established by the Army Corps of Engineers establishes a preferential hierarchy of compensation mechanisms. And these are really really imperative because you have to follow this hierarchy. First, if a mitigation bank is available in your service area, and we'll talk about service areas a little bit later in my presentation, you must utilize the mitigation bank. If a mitigation bank is not available in your service area, you can then proceed to an in lieu fee program. In the state of Iowa, in lieu fee programs don't currently exist, so your truly second option would be then permittee responsible mitigation, which is essentially establishing a mitigation priority on a site that will account for your impacts. So banks are preferred because they are larger sites than permittee responsible mitigation, and they typically have an environmental lift that is really positive to the watershed, whereas permittee responsible mitigation sites are kind of like postage stamps all across the landscape. Because of their size and demonstrated ecological benefits, they also have financial insurances, and credits are released for sale only when milestones are hit. This is really the reason why mitigation banking has become the top of the pyramid for priority. A little bit more discussion on permittee responsible mitigation. There's been a lot of studies conducted that show that permittee responsible mitigation sites have a very high likelihood of failing. In addition, they're very difficult for the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA to track their success. And typically, most don't meet standards or fail throughout the lifetime of their existence. So that's really why mitigation banking has become very important for compensatory mitigation. So when is mitigation banking or when is mitigation triggered? For wetlands, and streams, it's really any feature that is under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers, and there are impact limits that trigger mitigation. So for wetlands, it's any permanent loss of more than 1/10 of an acre. In cases where there are temporary impacts, if the permittee can return those areas to pre-construction condition, there are no mitigation requirements. Streams are a little bit more complicated. There's two triggers of permanent loss. It's first being any impact that's larger than 3/100ths of an acre or approximately 1,300 square feet of impact. And this impact area is measured at the ordinary high water mark and below. The ordinary high water mark, for anyone who doesn't know what that is typically the area of a stream channel that does not allow vegetation to grow. It's where that water fluctuates and vegetation just simply does not grow there. The other impact trigger is any impact above 300 linear feet of loss. And this is measured along the thalweg of the stream. If you picture a thalweg or a stream channel, that lowest point in the stream channel, that is the thalweg. So any impact that's more than 300 linear feet would trigger mitigation for a stream. So what is a loss? I mentioned that in the last slide. Well, the loss of wetland or stream bed includes the acres or lineal footage of wetland or stream that is permanently adversely affected by the filling or excavation of a regulatory or a regulated activity. So permanent adverse effects or impacts include a discharge of fill material that causes an aquatic area to become dry land. It could be the increase of a stream bottom that ultimately causes that stream to become dry land, or the use of a stream channel being changed. So if that stream gets moved, that is considered an impact. So ultimately, any waters in the United States that are temporarily filled, flooded, or excavated, drained that are not restored to pre-construction contour or elevation will have to have mitigation. A really important part that comes up in the mitigation process is the avoidance and minimization process. So when a project ultimately determines that it is going to impact a wetland or a stream, when it goes to the Army Corps of Engineers, they will require those permittees or the person doing the impact to the water to either first avoid the aquatic resource. If the aquatic resource can be entirely avoided, that plan must be modified to do so. If it can't be entirely avoided, you must work to minimize your impacts. And really, that is the loss to ultimately come down so we don't have to have as much of an impact to those wetlands or streams. And once that has finally been conducted, you must then compensate through mitigation those losses. So I'll walk you through an example. Typically, when a developer comes to us, let's say they want to build a convenience store on this location. So uh, the image that you're seeing on the left, they typically always want to cross streams or put buildings right on wetlands. So that initial impact in this instance would have been zero point 0.4 acres of wetland or 653 linear feet of stream. If we can work through the process to minimize those impacts, in this case, we can't avoid all impacts. So we push that site to the north and then extend it to the west, and then ultimately don't have that road crossing going across the stream. That ultimately results in a 50% decrease of the wetlands down to 0.24 acres, and then no impact to stream channel. So that's really that initial step to try to understand how we can avoid the impacts in the very first place and then minimize them. So at that point, we know we are going to have to compensate for that wetland or stream loss. So let's really get into what is a mitigation bank. Uh, a mitigation bank is typically a large wetland or stream site that has been restored, established, and or enhanced for the purpose of providing compensation for those unavoidable impacts. And that's under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, as we discussed earlier. They are built after the scrutiny and approval of the interagency review team. And the interagency review team is led by the Army Corps of Engineers, the US EPA, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, the NRCS, and the DNR, at least here in the state of Iowa. It does vary from state to state, but at least here in Iowa, those are the agencies that are involved. Uh, the example that we're seeing here on the screen, this is the Niebuhr Mitigation Bank. I did not work on this at Shive Hattery, but I worked on this in my previous employer. Uh, in this instance, you can see a stream channel that is farmed on either side. It was really wet, and this farmer couldn't farm all the way up to the edge of the stream. But through our mitigation process, we actually returned that stream channel back to its original alignment and then recreated and enhanced wetland areas along that stream corridor. So that's how this particular project worked to create those mitigation banking credits. There's really four distinct components of mitigation banks. The first being the bank's site itself, and this is the physical acreage that is restored, enhanced, or preserved. The second component being the service area, and this is the geographic area in which permitted impact from the Army Corps of Engineers can be offset or compensated for at a given bank. So I'll get into service areas a little later in the presentation, but generally, if you impact within this area, you must compensate from a bank that resides within that area, and that is the service area. The third component of a mitigation bank is the banking instrument. And this is the formal agreement between the owners of the bank, the bank sponsor, who does the day-to-day work with the bank, obtaining purchase agreements, selling credits, all of that good work. And then the regulators under the IRT that will manage, monitor, and ultimately set the terms of the bank's credit approval. Bank sponsors, I kind of want to get back to that a little bit. In the state of Iowa, we have seen bank sponsors be cities. They can be county entities. They can be private citizens. They can be mitigation banking companies that specialize in mitigation banking alone, or they could be nonprofits such as the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, or other entities like that. And then we talked a little bit about the interagency review team. This is the fourth component of a mitigation bank. And again, the interagency team provides regulatory review, the approval, and the oversight of the bank throughout its life. So, establishing a bank on your property can be a real financial endeavor. It definitely is something, though, that has some minutia and details that you kind of want to keep in mind. First is the time investment involved with establishing a bank. It typically takes no less than 225 days of federal review time. So really, by the time you figure out that you want to start establishing the bank, it's going to be over a year-long process just to get approval to begin construction. Um, to find a site that meets sizing criteria, and this is something that was set by the Rock Island District for Iowa and Illinois. So in this instance, streams must create 30,000 credits, or a bank that has wetlands must create at least 25 acre credits. So that really does start to find sites that are larger in size to make sure that the development is really worthwhile for the state. The next thing to establish a bank is really some site assessments to see if the site is suitable to become a bank. These include wetland delineations to map the extent of wetlands and streams and other features that are currently on the site. Another thing is cultural resource investigations, and this is required under Section 106 of the Clean Water Act to ensure that we're not impacting any cultural resources that might reside on the site through the construction of the bank. Additional assessments include vegetation assessments to see what the quality of the vegetation that currently is on site consists of. These can also include stream assessments to inform the design, and then any other assessments that are requested by the interagency review team to make sure they know what is on the site. Another component is the establishment of a long-term management fund. The long-term management fund is a financial fund that ensures the long-term success of the bank. It establishes appropriate mechanisms for managing the funds that include really these could be endowments, trusts, contractual agreements, or other mechanisms that are deemed appropriate by the interagency review team. Once all of that has been completed and the bank is approved through a banking instrument, you can then begin construction. So now that we kind of understand the process, I want to walk through the process a little bit. This is Lambert's Landing. This is a mitigation banking site that we're currently working on here at Shive Hattery on the northwest side of Des Moines. The site before construction, as you can see on the left side, was a former property that was farmed right up to the edge of a constructed wetland that was originally constructed for waterfowl hunting purposes. On the southern side, you can also see a feature labeled DWH1. That was a woodland pond that was additionally constructed for migratory bird hunting recreational activities. Improvements on the right side of the screen included emergent and wetland or forested wetland restoration and enhancement. It also included the establishment of a stream buffer. This was really important because the edge of the stream had been mown. There was very little woody vegetation, and that stream was kind of really just at its own mercy, moving across the landscape. So that in-stream work is really being conducted to reconnect the stream to its floodplain it was highly entrenched. So we reduced the elevation of the banks, and then ultimately included some other features that work to decrease bank erosion. So now we'll look at a few of these different techniques that were included in the bank. Here we can see some very large trees. Through the vegetation assessment on the site, we noted that there was essentially a monoculture of silver maples on the site, and one component of bank establishment is really creating a diverse population of vegetation on the site. So that work required us to remove a bunch of trees, which were silver maples. With all of that extra woody vegetation on site, we didn't want to just grind it up and haul all of it away. You can see a few piles of wood chips in the background of the photo on the right where we did do that. However, we also used some of the root balls from these trees to do root wad installations on the outside bends of streams, of the stream's banks. The IRT in this instance did not want any stone material being used within the stream. So we utilized that woody material to improve the stability of the banks, and then ultimately brought the banks down to recreate a floodplain connection. This photo is from day one of construction. A controlled burn had just been completed, and the woody vegetation removal had just started. So this is what the site kind of looked like when we started. Just 2 days ago, this is the same exact spot looking the same direction. You can see we've brought that area down. Floodwaters flowed into there. We've already established shallow floodplain wetlands, and then some exposed emergent wetland areas across that site. So it's really exciting to see um, the floodplain reconnection really starting to happen. It'll probably look completely different once vegetation starts to establish. So really excited to see how that develops. We did discuss service areas. In the state of Iowa, there are, I should have this noted down, but there's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight service areas within the state. These are the geographic areas for which permitted impacts can be compensated for by a bank. Uh, these different service areas kind of fluctuate in the amount of banks that are available. The Upper Des Moines mitigation service area that covers the western portion of Des Moines, some portion of Fort Dodge. There are a bunch of mitigation banks in this service area because it accommodates some larger urban areas. We do have service areas that have slightly less urban areas. These include the Driftless and the Upper Missouri. And these are really areas that need more banks to offset project impacts. I know I just worked on a project 3 weeks ago that needed some service or mitigation credits in the Driftless area. Unfortunately, there were none available. So we're really just playing a waiting game now until more credits become available. So that's really the two areas in the state that could use some more mitigation banks. What are the benefits of establishing a mitigation bank on your property? The biggest one being financial benefits. Ultimately, these credits are being sold for a profit. Mitigation banking credit sales do occur under a free market system, so the pricing of these credits does fluctuate. For emergent credits, we see typically anywhere between $55,000 to $75,000 pricing per acre credit. So just compound that by however many acres you have established. That would be what your ultimate uh, return on investment would be. For forested credits, we see typically a pricing of $60,000 to $80,000 per credit. And then for stream credits, these fluctuate fairly widely. We see them down to $30 per linear foot. These are in service areas that have a lot of stream credits available, all the way up to $120 per linear foot. The cheapest credits being found again in the Upper Des Moines service area, and then the most profitable credits being found in the Driftless service area. I did mention that there is a fairly lengthy bank approval process. And this consists of at least 225 days of federal review. Phase one is a review of a draft prospectus. This is an optional phase. The prospectus is your plan that is presented to the IRT for what is currently existing on the site and what improvements do you intend to do that will result in mitigation banking credits being um, created. The first truly required phase is the submittal of the actual prospectus. That's then results in a 90-day review by the IRT. The IRT will respond to the sponsor after those 90 days are complete. The sponsor will consider those comments, prepare and submit a draft instrument. And that instrument, as I mentioned earlier, is really I'll call it the cookbook of what will happen on the site from construction through the bank's life all the way to closing it and then it becoming a perpetually saved site. Phase three, once that banking instrument has been submitted, the IRT reviews again for 90 days. They then submit their comments back to the sponsor, who considers those comments and prepares the final instrument. After a 45 day review period by the IRT, they will respond to the sponsor and say whether or not the bank is approved or denied. If approved, at that point, you are off to the races to begin construction. So really, it's a race to this component right here, getting it constructed, and then you can begin to sell credits. And one thing before I end here, there is a credit release schedule that occurs. Once you have everything constructed, you don't get 100% of the mitigation banking credits that are available. They really go in 15% increments, with the first being 15% of your credits being released at approval of the mitigation banking instrument. There's an additional 15% released once you've completed the construction and all restoration has been documented and submitted to the IRT. And then from there, it's 15% release amounts for each consecutive year after mitigation banking monitoring has taken place, all the way through the life of the bank. So with that, that's really quickly how mitigation banking result or works in the state of Iowa, how it benefits farmers who have wet areas or streams along their area that you're thinking, well, what the heck can I even do with this? My father, my grandpa was never able to farm it. Well, maybe a mitigation bank would be the answer for those areas on those pieces of farmland. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Matt for questions.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jake. Let's go to a few of the logistical slides and keep your questions coming in. We got some good ones so far. But if you watch this webinar live and are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu. Email her by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Let's go to the next slide. If you're willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. Only one survey response is needed for all 2025 webinars. So if you've done so in 2025, thanks so very much. And if you're willing to, we'd greatly appreciate it. iowalearningfarms.org/survey, or you can scan that QR code. We can go to the next slide. I know what you did last summer, a Scandinavian bioreactor tour. So we have our friend Dr. Laura Christensen going to talk about bioreactors in Scandinavia. So we got her, her family vacation of bioreactors, but it will be a lot more interesting than my family vacation trip would be. So please tune in next week to hear about bioreactors in Scandinavia. And then I think one last slide, which should be that you'll be able to find this today's webinar and all previous webinars on the Iowa Learning Farm webinar archive. So if you missed something, you can go back and watch it. If you know of somebody that this might be of use to, please let them know. Okay, Jake, let's get to some of these questions. The first one was there was a question about they thought the 3/100th stream impact threshold replaced the 300 linear feet threshold.
It has not.
Okay,
It is either or.
okay,
Typically, we'll see the 300 linear feet threshold trigger mitigation first. And for mitigation, it's if 1/10 of an acre. So let's say we have wetland and stream impacts. If 1/10 of an acre of wetland is triggered, but you only have 2/100ths of an acre of stream impact, both wetland and stream must be mitigated, and vice versa. If the stream uh, threshold is tripped, then you have to mitigate for your wetland impacts. So both are still uh, included in the guidance.
okay. All right. Question here. How long did the Niebuhr mitigation project take for restoration? Or
Niebuhr,
yeah, restoration.
so the Niebuhr site in Northeast Iowa, shoot, I think it was probably 2 full years. I left my previous employer right
Okay,
in the middle of construction, so I can't tell
okay,
you the exact end date. But it was about a year and a half from the first time we actually set foot on the property after being engaged by that landowner
okay,
to when the mitigation banking instrument was signed and construction actually started.
okay.
So it is a little bit
And
of a lengthy process.
yeah, and I think you highlighted that in your talk about the time, but it'd be something that if landowners are interested in this, they need to have some patience that it's not going to happen overnight.
Yep.
Um, the next one is how would a change in water habitats as a result of drain tile be handled?
So are you saying if we severed the tile and that caused flow from that tile
I,
to cease going into the
well, and I
lagoon?
think, this one may have been for, you know, thinking about it uh, if somebody were draining an area and that's where it may trigger mitigation if they're improving drainage in an area that is a wetland.
So severing drainage tiles,
Oh,
that is not regulated under Section 404 of the Clean Water
okay,
Act. 404 is really any preventing net loss of wetlands through the placement of fill material. So cutting a tile would not be a regulated activity
okay,
under 404.
okay. Uh, Uh, Next one, how are efforts to install or restore wetlands as a project handled when a stream or ditch is altered? Do they have the same stream mitigation and com compensation requirements as other land development?
In most cases, yes. It's like I kind of covered. It's if that stream, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, if that stream moves and those wetlands are impacted by the movement of that stream, yes, that is an impact that would need to be regulated. Ideally, that movement would result in the wetland being, if it was on the left side of the stream, being on the right side of the stream now. But it really is, it's a case by case basis for all of
Yeah,
these considerations.
yeah, and I think this one may have been getting at if you're restoring or installing a wetland and part of that wetland is going to impound over a former stream or over a stream, does that have the same stream mitigation compensation requirements as other land
Okay.
development?
I think I understand that question
Yeah.
now. No, there is a nationwide permit. So for clarification, there are three types of permits that are issued under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. The most constrictive being what's called an individual permit. And individual permits are issued on a case-by-case basis for projects that have an extremely large impact to waters of the United States. The second being a regional general permit. And these are issued by districts, typically on a state-by-state basis. The state of Iowa has, I think, about 20 or so regional permits. And then third being a nationwide permit, which is permits that cover the entire nation and are for substantially less impactful developments. And the permit that would cover the instance that you're describing would be a nationwide permit number 27, which is enhancement activities. And that particular permit does not have a mitigation requirement because you're essentially working to improve aquatic resources. So they're not going to make you mitigate for those impacts.
Yeah, I think that there may be some questions around that because some of the wetlands that are going in uh, specifically for nitrate reduction as part of the nutrient reduction strategy do not fall under that.
That's correct. We do see, and we've been working on some stream projects. Uh, the Corps is very not lenient on stream impacts. We have had to mitigate for similar projects where we're re-meandering stream channel to put in constructed wetlands. Under the current regulatory structure, it really is starting to come down to the classification of what is or is not a waters of the United States. And there are certain stream channels that are not regulated under the current structure. So that has worked to some of those projects' benefits, but sometimes if you're moving the channel, you may have to compensate for its alteration.
Yeah. Okay. But under the nationwide permit, they can make some allowance for kind of the overall impact on aquatic resources. But then in other cases, that's not being considered when the Corps deems that stream mitigation is necessary.
Correct. And the
Okay.
district chief, Matt Zier, for Rock Island District in Iowa, does have the authority to assess those projects on a case-by-case basis and make modifications to those
Okay.
requirements.
Sounds like it's, yeah, going to create, and I think it is creating significant challenges for one-off for each of these systems.
It is.
Okay, let's get to some more uh, positive things. Can you talk about property boundaries and neighbors? These streams and wetlands may cross some property boundaries. How does that work?
So we had a very similar instance on the Lambert's Landing site. I'll just go back to that slide,
Yeah, yeah.
actually.
That those are more interesting to look at than than the one we had there.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this is a
Uh,
cool one.
So in this instance, I probably should have had a more zoomed out view of where this site is situated. In Polk County, they are currently working to acquire a property named the Brenton Slough, and that would be located just to the southwest of this site. Mitigation banks cannot impact neighboring properties, plain and simple.
Okay.
If you can see on the right image, there's an orange polygon that's called buffer establishment. There
Yeah.
must be a buffer that entirely surrounds the mitigation site so it does not impact neighboring landowners. For stream work, you really are working with a riffle pool structure. So if you're starting on the upstream side, you start your work at a riffle, and you need to work to another riffle on the downstream side that is within the confines of your banking site, all in an effort to prevent impact to other neighboring properties. The reason I brought this up on Lambert's Landing, though, we did reach out to the neighboring landowners who initially were interested in partnering with us. Ultimately, that just all kind of fell through, but that's all a consideration that you do need to ensure that you're not impacting neighboring property owners.
And is that the question for me that in that buffer establishment, so that buffer that needs to be there between landowners, is that or would that be included in the potential mitigation acres, or is that
It
n-
is. Yep.
it is?
So
Okay.
there are different ratios assigned to
Okay.
those areas. So that upland buffer that is established would be uh, accounted for at a 4-to-1 ratio. So if there were 4 acres, you would only get 1 acre credit for that area.
Okay. Um, is there's a question here is I think I know this, but typical life of a bank, there's perpetuity, correct?
It's
Or
in
what?
perpetuity. Yep.
Yep.
So
Okay.
this will remain for
It,
forever.
and the landowner, the individual landowner owns this property, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
At the end of the life of a bank, a lot of banks do go into possession of
Oh,
other entities. So it could become the property of the state, it could become the property of a county conservation
okay.
entity, but it must remain untouched for the remainder of its life.
Okay. And when you say that the period is that um up until all the credits are sold?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. And kind of on that time frame you talked about with releasing credits.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. All right. Ah, what does monitoring of these projects look like after the site is complete? Uh, I guess to kind of make sure that you know the we're getting what we want or need from the quality of the credits.
Yep. So there are yearly monitoring reports that must be submitted, and
Okay.
those credit release schedules hinge on when those
Okay.
reports are received. So those reports are monitoring the actual establishment of hydric soils, the establishment of high quality native vegetation. A really huge component of the establishment of banks is ensuring that there is a low ideally, there are no invasive species of vegetation on the site, but the IRT does realize that it's really difficult in the state of Iowa to not have any invasives
Okay.
on a site. So it's monitoring that. And then um, I said hydric soils. Oh, and hydrology.
Okay.
So each monitoring event is essentially conducting a new wetland delineation to see how soils and everything are developing across the site. And sometimes those monitoring events do identify issues within the bank. It's
Okay.
typically vegetation. Sometimes wetland areas aren't excavated enough or the water table isn't high enough to actually establish wetland. So then remediation of those issues would be required.
Okay. Thanks. That's great. Um, I guess first off, what would be the first step for an interested landowner?
First step would be really an initial site assessment with a consultant to see if you have a site that you don't want to put a mitigation bank at the top of a hill. Ideally, they're close to a stream or in the prairie pothole region within an area that you could easily establish wetland within currently upland areas, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So that first step would be just a site walk to see is it even feasible to do something with mitigation banking on the site,
Okay.
and then you
Um,
would proceed from there.
okay. Uh, two more questions here, I think, is who's responsible for managing the invasive plant species? I'm assuming the landowner or the
That is the
person.
bank
Yep.
owner
Okay.
with the assistance sometimes of the sponsor.
Okay. The next one, if a landowner's interested in a mitigation bank, are they allowed to have in CRP or any other farm bill conservation programs on the same acreage considered for the mitigation bank?
I have not ran into this instance, but typically because there is a financial gain from the development of a mitigation bank, I believe the answer from the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA would be no, that you
Okay.
would have to remove those areas from CRP.
Okay. This. Another one here. How easy is it to legally remove tiling?
I think as long as you're not within a drainage district, severing a drainage district tile. For Lambert's Landing, for existence, we had three tile outlets that outletted into this wetland WL1. We're actually severing those tiles to allow for those to outlet into the 12.64 acre area and
Oh, great.
4.59 acre area.
Yeah,
And that would really be additional hydrology into those areas.
yeah. Where you might run into a problem is if you were to plug those tiles so that you impacted upstream landowners.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, uh, Somebody asked, can someone build wetlands and enhance streams prior to consulting a consultant, assuming due diligence is showed before and after results?
No, would
Okay.
be the answer. The
Okay.
Corps wants to know, it would be hard to have documentation of what work conducted if you don't engage someone or the IRT prior to
Okay.
that construction.
Okay. There was one here. Does the Corps of Engineers give credit for volunteer trees?
For volunteer, as long as they're of a species that
Okay.
is
Desirable
considered
species? Okay.
beneficial.
Yeah.
The species that the Corps is really looking for when it comes to trees is hard mast producing species. I'm going to keep referencing you back to Lambert's Landing here. We
Yeah.
had silver maples.
Yeah.
In the mitigation plan for this site, it was introducing bottomland oaks and
Hmm.
other species that produce hard mast onto the site and increasing that species diversity.
Okay.
So, yeah, volunteer trees that are of a beneficial species or type, that would be credit for the mitigation bank.
Cool. All right. Uh, Jake, this is super interesting. I think provides a lot of important information for others. So thank you very much. Um, As always, if you need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today, including your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, tune in next week to hear Laura Christensen talk about bioreactors. And with that, Jake, thank you again for being willing to present and providing really useful information for folks that are interested in mitigation in one way or another. So thanks
Thank you for
again.
having me.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye.